What we're doing here is taking the bearings one by one because we want to keep them in the locations where we measured them out to be. They'll probably be fine swapping them around, but I measured them for that location, so that's where they're going to stay. We're going to get all that oil off that's probably been collecting dust here, or whatever grit might have entered the air, and get them cleaned off in the solvent. So this little process again is doing the bearings one by one, and then clean them with lacquer thinner so they're nice and clean. Then we'll put them in. Okay, and we'll do that for the other bearings, and then next step we'll do is clean off the crank, and then get it put in place. Oh, wait a minute. Let me backtrack. We'll clean off the cam, get that put in the block, and then we'll put the crank in. This way, if we have to reach down to try and help guide the cam, there's access to do it before the crank is in place. All 5 bearings are in place. So now we'll put a little lubrication on the cam bearings, and then clean up the cam, and then get it installed. Hey, it's a cam fountain, roller cam fountain. Get this cleaned up, and then to make this little handle longer, I'm going to put some vice grips on the end, and we'll get that installed. Like the game Operation, kinda, only better. Okay, one more set of journals. There we are. Okay. All right. We're going to put half of the rear main seal, lubricate the bearings, and then put the crank. Oops, forgot I didn't have the camera on, but I put the rear main down, and I don't really want to try to pull it back up out of place. But here it is. It's got some engine assembly lube, that sticky stuff on both sides of it, and so we'll get the other half ready for the cap and get that put in. Crankshaft fountain. And if you look, this one does say 4. If I can get the glare. Well, it says 4.250. So now, at least we have the right crank. And while I didn't run anything it sat there, and so we're gonna take this little brush. We're gonna brush all these holes in there as well. Did it before, I'll do it again. This time for the main bearings, I'm going to use this mixture of STP and 30 weight break-in oil. Last time I used the engine assembly lube, and all the bearings stuck to the crank, and they lifted off with it, everything except the number 3. And I think that stuff's just a little too sticky. And yeah, chances are when I prime the engine, it's going to wash some of that out in place of engine oil, but I'm just going to put the engine oil in here. And of course, it's still going to get primed. But I just feel a little better with that. It's a little less sticky, and things will, you know, turn a little easier anyway while I'm spinning it over, putting it together. There we are. There's the crank. Okay. Now time to put the main caps on. So here's the main caps. Of course, everything there is going to get washed. This RTV is going to get cleaned off, and the bearings are going to get cleaned up as well. And then they will get put in place and torqued down. So here we are. Got number 5 in, torqued down, and we're going to put in the RTV. Here's the tip of the RTV, and it's going to go right over here. So we're going to squeeze that in, and you can see it goes, well, there's a little excess that came out, but it made it all the way down there to the bottom. I had a little bit down in the corner. I put a little bead in the corner. Just try to get some of this excess off here. If you didn't see that side, let's see if we can move the crank a little bit to get a better view. Alright, so here we go. Shove the tip in there good. And it comes purging out all the way down. Just get the excess off. Yep, that's a good trick. We use RTV and transmissions every day. Rear axles. You know, factory, they quit using gaskets when RTV technology came up, you know, when it got better. All right, now that number 5's in place, we are going to, we'll do number 3. I don't know, I suppose we could do number 4. It won't really matter. So we'll just keep going in order here. With the lacquer thinner, we will clean off the bearing bore. Make sure there's no grit there. Clean off the back side of the bearing. And then get that put in place. There. Okay, then we'll bring you over here. Oh. One thing we can't forget to do is put a little oil on the bearing. Set that down. A little bit of lube on the bolt threads. And we'll bring this home. Then we'll move on to the next one, and after we get all the way up front, then we'll torque them in place. Put a coating of this camshaft lube on the back side of the cam retainer. And we're going to use some Loctite on the camshaft retainer bolts, or screws. They're actually screws. They have Phillips heads. Now, I wouldn't say I get that tight enough with a screwdriver, so I'm going to take this little pipe wrench here and probably pulling about 30 pounds with this pipe wrench. Which means I got to put the pin back in the engine stand. There. I think those are going to stay put. They got lock washers, Loctite, and they're pretty darn tight. Okay, let's put on the cam sprockets. And it's still lined up to 0. I put it in the box this way, and it's still got quite a bit of lube. We'll add a little bit down here by the keyway. And on the pin. Oh, and also on the face of the retainer plate, we want to make sure it doesn't gall there on startup before it gets oil slung on it. Oops. Now, what's the deal? Oh, right on. Okay, so it's got a little tension on it, I guess. Gotta find 0 again. And where'd it go? Oh, there it is. Well, it's got a lot of markings on it, but I think that's the way it goes. Here it is. That's it. It's amazing the difference, how easy this turns compared to when it had the engine assembly lube, which was pretty sticky. Camshaft bolt gets torqued to 45 foot-pounds. There we go. Here's the cam plug, and I use some 600 grit to just kind of break the glaze on the surface around the outside, because I wanted to scuff it up, so I can use some green Loctite here. And it bites better to a rough surface than it does a smooth surface. Get this bushing driver, and we're going to drive in the cam plug. And that sounds like it's bottomed out. So I've got 5, 6, 7, and 8 installed in the same fashion that I did before. Now I just got to do 1, 2, 3, and 4. So number 4 and number 3 went in, and here's what we're doing. I'll show you on number 2. We're going to move the crank down to where we want it to be, and then find number 2, which is number 2. I'm going to get these cleaned up. I mean, I kept them pretty clean. Bolts are good, but we're gonna, we're just gonna get just in case any dust settled on them. And come over here to the parts wash tank. Gonna set that right there. Take these apart. Get them cleaned up. Make sure there's no dust on them. They get set on the workbench. You do the same thing here with this bearing. And then we'll just kind of hose this down a bit. Put these rings back where they go. Okay, so we'll bring that over to the workbench. we're going to take coffee filter, some lacquer thinner. Whoops, it's a little much. Wipe out the bearing bore and the new bearing, or well, same bearing. Get that put in. Give it a wipe across the face of the bearing. And then we'll do the same thing to the cap. Wipe out the bearing bore. And wipe off the back of the bearing. And then put the bearing in place. Give the face of it one wipe. Set that right here. And we'll put some oil on the piston rings. Set that down. Piston ring compressor fell on the floor, so I'm going to put it on the piston. I had to clean it off. Now we're going to put it on the piston. And these are very sensitive rings. They're very, very thin, 1mm rings. Okay, so if you let it engage a little bit. Boy, these things are a little touchy. Actually, I did 7 or 6 in a row, no problem. Now that I'm showing one on camera, it doesn't want to go together. But all right, there it is. So now that that's there, I'll hold this by the rod. We'll put a little oil on the bearing, and then find where it's supposed to be. Drop it in place. Give it a little tap into place here. If anything hangs up, you got to stop right there. No forcing it. And we are in. And then just push it down, kind of close. And then I'll tap it the rest of the way with the piston hammer. There we go. We'll put some oil on the bearing that's in the cap. Set that there. Grab a bolt, make sure it's got decent lube on it. Start that. Grab the other one. And then run them in with the speed handle. Make sure they go in evenly. Tighten it a little bit by hand, and then that one's in place. Then we got one more to do. Number 1. Now that all the rods are in place, we get to torque them to 65 foot-pounds. So this is the spacer for the harmonic balancer. Slides on here, and it's got keyway that holds it in position. But as you can see, it's got a pretty big seal groove in it. And here's what we're going to use to fix it. It's a ready sleeve or a speedy sleeve. It's a repair sleeve. Let me take it out of the box here. What I do is I measure with the calipers and find the diameter. Then I have a chart that I actually stapled on my wall of all the different sizes and the correct part numbers. So we'll have this and we'll get this put on. Probably we're going to try and center that for where the seal is. So in fact, I'll make a mark to do that. So that's where that top hat needs to go down to. And then it'll be in the right place. So let's go put this together. So I'll put a little bit of RTV around the, even though it fits tight, I don't want to have the chance of it leaking between the seal. Now this cup it comes with is the driver. So we'll bring it over to the arbor press. Find where we put our mark, which is right here. This is quick and easy. And then we'll bring it down right about there. And that's so that's on there, and we have this little top hat thing that we need to get rid of. I'll lay the rest of the trash on this bench. So I take a pair of dikes and then basically twist that. It's got a little parting line there. You want to be careful not to nick the, ouch, oh, it's sharp. Just stabbed myself with it. Not the first time I cut myself with a Speedy Sleeve. They are very sharp. Okay. So we'll take a rag, wipe off any excess RTV that's on there. Huh, hey, look at that! It cut me right through the glove. Wow. Not the first time for that either. But here we go. So that's a restored sealing surface. Back again today. We are getting ready to put on the oil pump. Drop that down there. And I've already had this mocked up. And this is, I don't know if I could do this with one hand. Alright, so I put a little break-in lube on the pump shaft. So I went to the hardware store and I got some grade 8 bolts. Okay, didn't put a torque wrench on them, but you know, they've got a lot of thread engagement and the Loctite, and yeah, they're going to be okay. They're nice and tight. Here's the oil pan plan on using, but we're going to have to wash it out here. As you can see, it's pretty cruddy with stuff inside of it right out of the box. So the other benefit to washing it out is I'm going to fill it up with solvent, see if it has any leaks, because I've had friends tell me that these things will right out of the box they leak around the welds and stuff. So we're going to make sure of that it's sealed up. I tightened up all the plugs on it, just like 2 places for a dipstick to go, and then there's a drain plug back here, and I've got the hose from the parts washer. So we're going to turn this on, fill this up, and see what we get. I would say that's probably enough. Pretty close to the brim, and it's above all the welds. Want to make sure not to drip any fluid on the outside of the pan. I'm going to let this sit a few minutes and see if we get any leaks. Well, so far so good. Well, it needed the solvent because it was dirty. But I think we're okay with leaks. We'll let this sit and work on something else for a little while. This is the oil filter adapter, and put a little dab of Loctite on each bolt. I'm going to cut off the excess of this gasket. It'll just look a little nicer after I get things painted. I'm going to tape this off to when I paint the block blue. I don't want to have a painted gasket sticking out so far. There, that looks good. I got the head gasket in place with the dowels here, and we're getting ready to put on a cylinder head. Now, some of you FE guys might be familiar with these. These are from Project JJ. I just happened to call at the right time and inquire, and I was able to purchase a set of cylinder heads that ran pretty darn good. Ports are real nice, made good power. It's got thin valve stems. I think they're 5/16 or 8 millimeter. Pretty darn close to the same thing, whether it's metric or standard. They are C6 AER heads. I don't know if I can, well, it's upside down, but they are C6 AERs, and the ports had a little bit of well, they were cleaned up pretty nice, and and new valves in them, so they should make this engine run pretty good. Oh, and it's got these conical valve springs with small retainers, so it's lightweight stuff. So we'll be putting a cylinder head on here in just a moment. The deck and the head surface were cleaned off with lacquer thinner before it went down on the gasket. Now we'll find some bolts to put on there and get it torqued into place. Head bolts. Yep. They'll just drop in and righty-tighty, torque them down, and that'll be it. No sense in watching a long, drawn-out process. It's not very long, but, you know. Anyway, okay. Dowels are in place. I wiped down the deck with some lacquer thinner so it's clean and dry. And here's the front, and the gasket says front. So we're going to get this put on, and then we'll set the other head on here after we get it cleaned off. Put a little lube on the bolt and get it dropped in place. It's got a washer on it already. And we'll do the same thing for the other 9 head bolts. Torquing the head bolts. Did a couple smaller steps. Started at 30, went to 65, and now we're at 100 here. Spiraling out from the center. I'll have you help me here if you want to do a couple. And then the last 2. Then we'll go over them one more time. And then probably before the valve covers go on, after these things sit for what might be a couple days, we'll retorque them one more time. Okay. All right, so we got 2 cylinder heads on here now. And it's getting heavier to turn. Maybe I need one of those engine stands that's got the crank on it. That might make things a little easier. All right, thank God we have an aluminum intake manifold, because this thing is that's probably the heaviest part besides the block, is the intake. Even though FE heads are kind of funny with the push rods going through the intake, it makes the cast iron heads lighter than they would be if they came out to here. You know, if they were out that much, you know, that much more or so. But yeah, all right, onward and upward. This is the front seal. I like to put a little just a little bead of super weather strip adhesive around the outside. Then we're going to go over to the arbor press. I'm going to set that right there. And this presses from the inside. So you're going to want to make sure to have the lip facing the correct way. Which the lip faces the inside of the transmission. Find a driver that, you know, oh, I need to prop it up with something here. Okay. Start with one that's a little bigger. Well, that looks like it's actually all the way in. Pretty darn close. Let me see if I can get a little more push on it with this one. No, that's it. We are there. I'm going to use a little trans gel here. It's a lube for assembling transmissions to put on this seal, and then we're going to find the gasket and get this put on the front of the motor. Now what we have is a little timing cover bolt set from AMK. These are stock reproduction of the stock bolts for the timing cover. And since we're going to be painting them, we don't need a decorative, polished, shiny bolt or anything, because it's all going to be painted blue like it came out of the factory. What I did do was just put a very light skim coat of RTV around here. These paper gaskets usually require some type of sealer, like that shellac works pretty good, or just a very, very thin coat of RTV. It helps hold it in place and just kind of guarantees the seal to take place. So I'm going to do a coat between the gasket and the engine block as well. Now, taking a second look here, just want to make sure we got everything in place. The cam has a little bit of end play. I didn't measure it, but I felt it. It's there. It's good. And I put the slinger on here. It's not 100% necessary, but you know, maybe it'll help with a little bit of oil movement, or at least keeping it off the seal to some degree. And so I think we're all set. Everything seems to be in place, and we're ready for the cover to go on. As you can see, there's a little streak of RTV, very light, doesn't need to be gobbed on. Oh, you know what? One thing that should be done is we'll put some lube around here for when the fuel pump goes in. And we'll hang it with a bolt, a couple bolts actually. And then we'll put the balancer spacer in place. And that's gonna center up for our that's gonna help center the seal. What we will do is some of these bolt holes go all the way through into like this one goes into the water jacket, so we want to make sure to put some sealant on the threads, you know, just some RTV on the threads, so we don't have coolant wicking out. Along where the threads are. Just gotta find the right socket for it. Run that in a little bit. And these ones on top, they go right through to the valley. So we don't want oil wicking out of those. So we'll put a little bit of RTV on those threads. We'll run them in close. Oops. Want to get all these bolts in place before we tighten any one of them down. Well, they gave me one really long bolt here. I don't remember where it goes, but I'm just going to use it to hold the gasket in position there. So I think I can find an old bolt to put in there. Now this feels pretty good on the bottom, being level. And put my glasses on and take a look and see if it looks like it's centered in the seal. Because sometimes these things will, gravity will pull them down a little bit, and then the seal is a little off center, but I think we're in good shape here. We'll get a bolt tightened up, and that's gonna, a couple bolts tighten up, and that'll hold it in place. Oh, don't get quite enough torque with the speed handle, but it really doesn't need much more. Now I'll find the other bolt to put in here. Well, I found one in the box of old hardware. It's a little rusty looking. I'm going to bring that over to the wire wheel, clean it up, and then we'll get it put in there. So I got a new balancer for it. This is a PowerBond PB 111 ST. It's got a nice little grid on it in the area that you really need it. However, I don't use it. I only mark 0 because I use a dial back timing light, and so all I need is the TDC position. And what we're going to do is put a little RTV around here just to make sure that we don't have fluid wick along the shaft and leak out. It seems like it has enough thread engagement that we can drive this on with the bolt and not really have it cause stress to anything. Yeah, if it took a lot of effort, it'd be turning the crankshaft and pistons. Whoop, there it goes. Well, we'll have to hold it, but it really doesn't take much effort to turn this with these really thin rings. But I feel having a balancer that's got a tight fit is going to be the most effective. I think we're touching now. ARP says to torque this bolt to 120 foot-pounds. So that's what we'll do. I'll need a means of holding the balancer from moving. These bolts also came in the AMK bolt kit. Thread those in a little bit. I'll use this long screwdriver that should have sufficient I guess we weren't quite seated. But here we are. There it is. Okay. Just a little further along. Yep, these bolts wound out straight, so they didn't get bent. Actually, you know what? I can put them so they stay in place. So I'm just going to thread them in here so I don't have to go looking for them later. That's good. They won't fall out. Well, this I guess this pointer's made for a bigger balancer, and we don't even know if it's actually at TDC. That's another thing that that we can check as well. May have been easier when the head was off, but it can still be done with a piston stop when the head is in place. Well, hey, how about we go take a look at that oil pan, see if it has any leakage. Oh, yes it does. It certainly does. Right around here where that weld was the kind of the lousiest looking. I don't exactly know where, but Now we got extra work to do because this stupid thing leaks. So now we'll have to look and see where it comes out. Well, as soon as I see it purge, I'll start up the camera. Well, after standing here for a while and cleaning it off and coming back and then having to clean it again, I'm pleased to say it's coming from around the plug. Now, I tightened this plug and I put it fairly tight, but I didn't use any Teflon tape or thread sealant or anything like that. So definitely when this goes together for the final time, if you're only using a plug there, you're definitely going to want to use some type of thread sealant. I thought it may have been leaking up in here, but that seems to stay dry. It is loading up in here. So if we take this coffee filter and lean it in there, you can see how it comes up. It's kind of hard to see, but it's saturated. Actually, it's saturated all the way up to about here. So, yeah, definitely. So I'm pleased to find out that the welds are okay. You know, I mean, you look at a lot of these welds, and it's pretty solid looking, and then this one's kind of spotty. You know, so I thought that one would have been the one that was leaking, but turns out it was a plug, which is good. Then the oil pan doesn't need any work. It could just be finished cleaning up and put on the engine. So the pan fits without hitting the pickup, which is good. And when you take a look here, you can see, let's see if we can get this at the right level. It's right about, it's an acceptable distance off the floor of the pan. So I think we're in good shape without, you know, putting putty or something up here and then trying to measure it. I really don't think that's necessary. This pan is going to have way more oil than a stock pan, and it will not have a problem. Well, I found the AMK bolt kit. It comes with the oil pan bolts, which are silver. And then I also had a kit of ARP engine bolts, which are black. Now, I have one ARP in there. I suppose it doesn't really matter. I'm not going to try to paint this pan. Paint never sticks to these, I mean, unless you blast the heck out of them, and I don't really feel like doing that. So I'm going to leave it natural as it sits under the car. Blue engine with a silver pan looks pretty nice, so we're gonna leave that. So I guess my decision is, do I want contrast or blending? Contrast or blending? I'm going to ponder about this a little bit, and we'll see what see where it ends up. So I went with blending. The ARP bolt's a complete bolt kit for an engine. I decided I was just going to leave that kit intact because I have another FE to rebuild on the horizon here. And you know, the plus, this takes 20 bolts all the way around, and they're all the same length. In the ARP kit, 4 of the pan bolts are longer. Instead of being like 1/2 inch or 3/4, whatever these are, they're like over an inch, maybe 1.25 inches. So they would need to be trimmed. I didn't really feel like doing that, and I said, you know, just to keep that bolt kit intact and complete, I just use these AMK bolts. I think they look good, and they will be just fine. So that's where we're at. Where to go next on this? I guess now it can, well, I could either do freeze plugs if I'm going to paint the freeze plugs, but I might leave them brass, so I don't know. Well, I'm going to flip it over and see what's next. Oops, one thing I forgot to do is lubricate the cam gear to drive the distributor. So, so I'm going to stick the. I have a little brush for this. I might find a longer brush. I have longer brushes. And as I roll over the engine, I'll be able to apply grease to the cam gear, so it doesn't start dry.